Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the part of the world you're joining us from, and a warm welcome to this Prevention Collaborative webinar. We are really happy and excited to be with you for the next 90 minutes. It's 1 hour and a half, and we really thank you for your time, and we appreciate the time that you dedicated to this webinar. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the Prevention Collaborative is a global network organization that aims to strengthen programming in the area of prevention of violence against women, with a particular focus on intimate partner violence and violence within the family. We also give a particular attention to programming around the intersection between violence against women and violence against children. We work to strengthen the capacity of key actors to design, deliver, and advocate for cutting-edge prevention programs informed by research-based evidence, practice-based learning, and feminist principles. So I'll introduce myself very quickly and then go off camera to let you see the full screen. I am Rita Nyiratunga, a Senior Associate Capacity Strengthening at the Prevention Collaborative, and I will be the moderator of this webinar. I'm happy also to acknowledge the presence of some colleagues behind the scene, Juliana and Ruti. I'll go off camera and continue to interact with everyone. So today's webinar is the last in a series of 3 webinars we hosted on Unite for a Better Life program. In the first webinar, we talked about developing and testing the Unite for a Better Life program. And in the second, we talked about adapting this program for a humanitarian context. I would invite you who want to see more or to know more about the previous webinars to visit our website where you can access all the recordings. Today, we'll be particularly talking about another adaptation of the same Unite for a Better Life program that focused on leveraging podcasts to prevent intimate partner violence. We are happy to have with us today 2 great people who were involved in this program adaptation, research, evaluation, as well as implementation. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Vandana Sharma and Machrine Birungi. A quick introduction to our speaker of the day. Dr. Vandana Sharma is a global health researcher at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative with expertise in impact evaluations, randomized controlled trials, and programming in development and humanitarian contexts. Dr. Sharma's research includes randomized trials of interventions to reduce maternal mortality in northern Nigeria and to reduce IPV and HIV transmission in Ethiopia, as well as mixed methods IPV research among Somali refugees. Her other research interests include assessing gender biases within humanitarian organizations and measuring gender-based violence risk mitigation in humanitarian emergencies. In 2019, Dr. Sharma was awarded the Canadian Excellence in Global Women and Children's Health Award for her contributions nationally and globally to improving women and children's health. We are so pleased to have you with us today, Vandana. We also have Machrine Birungi joining us from Uganda. She's a media award winner with more than 15 years of solid communications experience in peace journalism, print, broadcast, and internet. She has previously worked as a radio producer for the UN mission in South Sudan and as a social media analyst with the United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS. Machrine has delivered several trainings packages in communicating, including podcast productions, reproductive health reporting, broadcasting techniques for community radio stations. She has written several research papers, including Information or Oppression. That's an analysis of media coverage of domestic violence in Uganda. She has won 2 awards, the Best Reporter of the Year in 1997 awarded by Uganda for her outstanding coverage of the war in northern Uganda. And she received the first prize award in the economic development category of the US Embassy in Uganda's Radio Awards in 2005. Congratulations, Machrine, for that. We are happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
So in this webinar, Dr. Vandana and Machrine will highlight good practices and challenges from developing and testing the Unite for a Better Life podcast series to prevent intimate partner violence in Somali refugee settings. Very exciting. So the UBL podcast series is an innovative gender transformative program that builds on the Somali tradition of storytelling. Podcast episodes, including drama, interviews, and debates, were co-created by Somali refugees and broadcast at listening centers in the Bokolmayo refugee camp along the Ethiopia-Somalia border. The Unite for a Better Life podcast series include a total of 16 episodes that address gender, healthy sexuality, conflict resolution, household task sharing, substance abuse, and sexual harassment. So before I hand over to our speakers, I would like to invite my colleague Juliana to give us a little bit of housekeeping. Juliana, over to you if you can hear me.
Thank you, Rita. Hi, everyone. This is Juliana, and I just wanted to go over a few ways you can engage in this webinar. So we are recording the webinar and we'll be sharing it via email. So if you've signed up for this webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with the recording. There's also going to be time for question and answer at the end of the session. And you can either type in your questions in the chat box. So if you see at the bottom of this screen, in the bottom of your screen in red, there should be a little chat box. You can click on that. And we ask that if you want everyone to see your comment or question, please make sure to change it to all panelists and attendees right here. Normally it just says all panelists, but we would like you to change it to all panelists attendees so everyone can respond and engage with you. And then during the Q&A itself, you can also have the option of raising your hands here in blue. And if you raise your hands, we'll take a few moments to call on you so you can ask your question out loud. So those are just a few of the ways you can engage with us, and we hope you enjoy this webinar. Back to you, Rita.
Thanks so much, Juliana. So without any further delay, if Machrine, Vandana, you're ready, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rita. I'll just turn my video on just for a second to say hello, and then I'll turn it off just for bandwidth issues. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Machrine and I are so delighted to have the chance to talk to you about this project. So I'll turn my video off now and get started. So the project was implemented in Daloado, Ethiopia between 2017 and 2019. We had a number of fantastic partners involved in the project, including the Women and Health Alliance Ethiopia, Addis Ababa University, Harvard Medical School, and the Fondation Hirondelle. We also had an immense amount of support during implementation from UNHCR and ARA, which is the Ethiopian ministry responsible for administration of the refugee camp. And the project was funded by the World Bank Group, the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Next slide, please. So this is our plan for today. We'll be sort of diving into different aspects of the project. Next slide, please. And next slide. Now, as Rita mentioned, this is the third webinar in a series about Unite for a Better Life. So some of you may have participated in the first and second webinars where we talked about the original Unite for a Better Life program developed for rural Ethiopia, or the second webinar where we talked about the adaptation of UBL for humanitarian contexts. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with UBL, I just wanted to present this slide again, just to give you an overview of the program and sort of what we've done over the course of the last 10 years or so. UBL was first developed, as you heard, for rural Ethiopia. And in that context, it includes 14 participatory in-person group sessions that cover a range of different topics. The program sessions are delivered within the context of the traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony, and we did complete a randomized control trial to evaluate the intervention when delivered to either groups of women, groups of men, or couples across a sample of close to 7,000 households in 4 different districts. We can share with you the links for both the primary and secondary findings papers that were published last year in PLOS Medicine. So we can post those in the chat and share them with you after as well. The second webinar I mentioned focused on our humanitarian adaptation. So that's the middle box on this slide. We were able to work with some amazing partners and colleagues to adapt Unite for a Better Life for the same refugee camp that we'll be talking about today for the podcast project. It's Bokolmayo. It's along the Somali Ethiopia border, and the adaptation included 16 sessions, so 2 additional sessions were added based on formative research that was conducted to understand better the drivers of IPV in the context. Instead of this Ethiopian coffee ceremony, the sessions were delivered within Somali tea talks. And then today we'll be focusing on the podcast adaptation. And so in order to reach harder to reach populations, we were able to secure some funding from the World Bank, SVRI, and the Swiss agency to expand our program to include the podcast episodes that correspond with the in-person sessions. Next slide, please. And then just to give you a sense, I mean, I've talked about this already, but the curricula is gender transformative. And here we're talking mainly about the in-person program, but you'll see as we get more into the podcast project, we really tried to stay true to the UBL components, even with the podcast intervention. But the original in-person program involved a gender transformative curricula. We have 3 different curricula, one for groups of women, groups of men, and couples. It includes facilitated discussions, activities, exercises, role plays, etc., to build skills and change behaviors. And it's delivered within a cultural or community practice. As I mentioned, in rural Ethiopia, this is the traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony. In Somalia, or the Somali camps, it's Somali tea talks. And another important component of this is really high quality facilitation. And so facilitators themselves complete the program first as participants. So they go through the 14 or 16 sessions as participants, and then following that, they participate in a 16-day facilitation training to master content and skills to deliver the sessions. The different topics are, there's a range of topics that are covered, including, gender roles, healthy sexuality, HIV and condom use, sexual consent and boundaries, power and control in relationships, joint decision-making, task sharing, healthy communication, emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and supporting survivors. Typically, there's about 20 or so individuals per group, and the sessions are delivered twice a week, either over 7 weeks in rural Ethiopia or 8 weeks, in the refugee camps. Next slide, please. And so the theory of change of Unite for a Better Life and the logic model are presented here, and they align with the ecological model for IPV and address underlying individual relationship, community, and societal factors that are determinants of risk in the context. The program does aim to improve knowledge, attitudes, and skills related to IPV and HIV, as well as improve couples' healthy communication, increase task sharing and joint decision-making, and reduce HIV risk behavior and substance use, and ultimately reduce IPV and HIV transmission. Next slide, please. I won't talk too much about this, but the facilitation during the coffee ceremony or the tea talks was an important component of the in-person sessions. It offered an opportunity to model and promote equitable behaviors and gender norms, in particular, because in Ethiopia, the traditional coffee ceremony is typically led by women who prepare the coffee and serve it. And so in the UBL sessions, in the first sort of couple of sessions, male facilitators in the men's groups or in the couples groups would model the preparation of the coffee. And following this, male participants would take turns in the remainder of the sessions to also prepare and serve the coffee. And so that was sort of an important component for the in-person sessions. Next slide, please. To give you just a bit of background on the location for the Humanitarian Adaptation and the podcast project, we worked in Bokolmayo refugee camp, which is one of 5 Somali refugee camps near Doloado, Ethiopia, which is a small town bordering Somalia. At the time of the project, UNHCR had estimated that there were about 200,000 Somali refugees across the 5 camps, with about 40,000 in Bokolmayo specifically. And Bokolmayo was the first camp to be established in the area, and it opened in 2009. So many of the residents of the camp have been there since those early days, since 2009, 2010. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving to the podcast project, the overall aim was to develop and test an innovative approach to prevent IPV using low-cost technology to empower refugees to create and disseminate local solutions, building on the Somali tradition of storytelling. The goal was to develop the podcast episodes as part of the series and to co-create them with Somali refugees and tackle subjects that I've already mentioned to you, gender, healthy sexuality, conflict resolution, etc. And Machrine will tell you a lot more about how we developed this and sort of the process for recruiting and mentoring the podcasters and the process for actually creating the episodes. But I'll just mention now that we did create 16 episodes, and they included a variety of content, including dramas, interviews with key experts and community members, debates, as well. There were take-home exercises or activities to try at home for listeners. Next slide, please. Next slide. And so this slide just gives you an overview of the approach that we had for developing and testing the IPV podcast intervention. So essentially, we worked with refugees in the camp, provided training in digital storytelling, interviewing, and editing, and then provided mentorship to enable the creation of the episodes. The episodes are then broadcast at listening centers set up in the camp, and each listening center is a site that's easily accessible, safe and private, and was selected in collaboration with community stakeholders. Now, the goal was, if the intervention is effective, then we could enable individuals to actually download the episodes to their devices at the listening centers so that they could listen to them whenever they desired, for example, in the privacy of their homes. And they would also then be able to share the episodes via peer-to-peer transfer with their friends, family members, and others. So therefore, this approach has the potential to be scaled up quite rapidly and at a low cost. I will note, for the purposes of this project, downloading and peer-to-peer sharing was not permitted, as our objective was first to assess feasibility and potential for knowledge and attitudinal change. And we did collect some pre and post pilot data to help identify some of those changes. Next slide, please. So the project included several phases. We analyzed formative data to inform the development of the intervention. We created the overall structure of the podcast and worked on scripts. Podcasters were selected and trained and co-created the content and edited the episodes together. The content was also pre-tested and refined with community members through sort of focus groups. And then finally, we conducted a small pilot test of the UBL podcast series at 2 listening centers within the camp. Next slide, please. I'll just briefly touch on some of the formative research. I've presented on this in the other webinars as well, so I won't spend too much time on this, but just to give you a little bit of a background as to sort of some of the norms, attitudes, and other important sort of factors related to IPV. We, in previous research, have found high prevalence of IPV in this setting, with over or close to 80% of women reporting experiencing physical IPV in their lifetime, and about 69% reporting experiencing sexual IPV in their lifetime. And there were sort of a number of other factors that were identified as part of the formative research that are listed here, related to sort of loss of livelihoods, increased substance use, and poor mental health, contributing to IPV in this setting. Next slide, please. And then I've shared this slide with you as well before. These are some of the quotes from a qualitative data that we collected to give you a sense of some of the norms and attitudes around women in this setting. So I won't go through those now, I'll just go on to the next slide. And then now I'm going to pass it to Machrine, who will take us through the process of developing the podcast. So over to you now, Machrine.
Thank you so much, Vandana, and thank you everyone who has joined us for today's webinar. I'm going to talk about the production of the Unite for a Better Life podcast, the podcast content and how we generated it, the technical and logistical processes that were involved, plus the challenges, as Vandana has explained. This was in Bokolmayo, quite a remote kind of location in the refugee camp, where some of the technical kind of needs that we expected were not even on the ground, but then we have to find a way to make sure that we are getting the important, we are producing the podcasts, involving the community, involving the 8 refugee youths that we recruited. So finally, I will also share with you a success story of transformation. So next slide, okay, maintain this slide. I could say that the production of the podcast, the UBL podcast development, went through 4 phases. The first phase was the planning phase. This is where we came together as a team and looking at the in-person UBL program. We discussed ways of kind of adapting it to a podcast version. So kind of converting or adapting the in-person UBL program to a podcast version. And this required concise outline comprising of scripts, as Vandana has already shared, because we believe that with the scripts, then to be able to help us in kind of condensing the content without eliminating the vital components that were important in messaging around the prevention of intimate partner violence. We went ahead and recruited a team of 8 refugees. These were young boys and girls. 3 of them were actually female, and then we had 4 who were, 5 who were males. And these, one of the important things I want to mention here is that they had no prior training in journalism and knowledge of the technical production tools like microphone handling, recording and editing equipment. But the key traits of the team that we are looking at during the recruitment of this team was the passion, the drive, and the desire to learn podcast production as a communication tool to support awareness about intimate partner violence and how to prevent it. So largely during the recruitment, we were able to draw from a pool of trained UBL facilitators. So majority, with the exception of 1, majority had participated in the in-person UBL program. So this was a bigger asset that the team had previous knowledge of the UBL in-person program. During the setup phase, after the recruitment, the team was introduced to the idea of digital storytelling, the podcast formats, including the interview, the vox pop, discussion, and drama, as well as IP prevention. This was very important because, like I've already mentioned, that during the in-person UBL training, it's basically, I could describe it as kind of passive, but then now you're looking at kind of active listening, because when you're producing a podcast, you're also imagining putting yourself into the shoes of the listener. How am I going to attract this listener and retain that listener, listening to content that is important to their life, to their communities, and everything? So we had to cut down the formats, identify the formats, but then also train the team in producing these varied formats, the interview, the workshop, the discussion, as well as the drama. And then we went ahead and introduced the team to the equipment. This was the recorder, microphone, Audacity editing software, and then the techniques of the studio. As I said, the team had no prior knowledge of journalism. They were looking at the recorder for the first time, handling the microphone for the first time, even editing, this was the first time experience for them. But then for the setup, this was important, like introduce them, then give them their own, or I could say on job kind of learning. They are on the site and then they are able to handle the recorder, handle the microphone, and then learn how to manipulate them to get the content that we need. So one of the glitches around the setup phase was identifying the studio. Like I've said, this is a rural community, it's a refugee camp, there's no studio. But then, the weather itself, this was a windy season where the winds are so high, they're gushing and the sound is up there. The iron sheets are flapping right, left, and center. But then what we did, this is where the creativity aspect came in, and the team was so cooperative. We said, well, we can make a makeshift studio. Thankfully, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the team there in Bokolmayo gave us a room, but then the room again, without any soundproof, would not give us the kind of audio that we would require for the podcast, a good quality podcast. So we bought mattresses and set up makeshift a studio where the mattresses, the team members would hold mattresses in the corners, and then people who are recording, let me say we are recording an interview, the team, the other possibly four members get inside there, they're recording an interview, they're interviewing someone, they're holding a discussion against the background of mattresses. And that helped us to get the kind of audio quality that we wanted. So as I've already said, the third phase was the recording phase. And during this, one of the other key activity under here was that the podcasts were recorded in line with the scripts, starting with the intro, welcoming listeners, and announcing the episode number. As Vandana has already said, we produced a total of 16 episodes, but each episode, for every episode, one thing that was obvious was that each episode tended to build on the previous one. So the kind of messaging tended to run through, that it was consistent. We had a fictitious team of a couple, Fauzia and Abdi, who came in to act. So they were acting the drama, but again, that drama contained actually the central message that was required in that particular episode. So let's say if the episode was about sexuality, Fauzi and Abdi, our fictitious couple, which was grown again from the team of 8, come in to discuss what they understand by sexuality, possibly the controversies surrounding that, or the cultural aspect that stopped them from even talking about it. And so when they act out, then an expert would come in to discuss what has been acted in the drama, and then kind of give their perspective related to sexuality and the way forward, where we had kind of the action, what next, what happens now that you've had this message. And this then took us, after the recording, took us to the post-production phase. And in this phase, the team edited and prepared the audio podcast files, and then removed all unwanted sounds, the silences, and leveled the audio, and then imported the WAV files into MP3 and added the MP3 tags, including the episode title, podcast name, genre, the copyright information, and much more. Next slide, please. So I could say, next slide, please. So with the production already underway, the recruitment done, one of the key, I could say there were some questions that we needed to answer before we embarked in the actual refining of the podcasts. And some of the questions was how to maintain the UBL fidelity when the content delivered passively versus in-person activity. By this, I mean UBL in person is people came in and discussed in groups, and then actions, you can see what is happening, how they are kind of appreciating the message that is given to them, how they are responding to the discussions, the activities given to them. Now, kind of adapting this content into an audio content itself was very crucial. It was a key question. How do we maintain some of the parts without necessarily kind of watering it down or even amplifying it to get beyond what was intended, what was initially intended in the UBL in-person activities. Then the next question was how to change the attitudes and promote behavior change through the audio, because with audio, as you may all agree, we are talking. Production has been done, the podcast is out there. Someone is listening in their house, but then we can't really gauge how they are, either what they are listening to will actually help them to change behavior or even in terms of attitude, that aspect of gauging what is happening at the time, because you have recorded, you have sent out the information there. We are not watching, whereas with in-person, you are able to gauge some of those activities. I mean, through the activities and the discussions, people were able to share what they believe, what they think can be done differently. Then that, again, led us to the other question, which was how to adapt the UBL delivery with the cultural ceremony to the podcast format. Vandana has talked about the coffee ceremony, which was in Ethiopia, but in the Somali refugee context, with the discussion, and that was critical for the production of the UBL podcasts, that we engaged. We had these small discussions, even right from the start, at the start of the production of the content, of the audios. Every time we went back to the script, we read the script together with the team, and they, being from the community itself, were able to share what they think is acceptable. Some aspects within the podcast, especially when it came to aspects of sexuality, we were dealing with the community where sexual matters are actually not even talked about. It's kind of a taboo, but then this team was able, coming from the community, to guide us and say, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. But then the ideas that came about in terms of adopting the coffee ceremony in the Somali refugee setting was the tea ceremony, because in Somali, they told us that every conversation is accompanied by a tea ceremony. So as part of kind of making our podcasts more engaging, kind of relatable to the community that we are talking to, it was important to integrate the tea break. And that's why we have the exciting, I could say that this was one of the exciting elements in the production. Not like I've said, we are on the ground. We don't have the technical aspects like saying we moved with sound effects, but again, trying to relate this product to the community that we are evolving or engaging in producing the podcasts. The team was very kind of, I mean, we need this tea ceremony. How do we do it? It's not about saying, let's go for a tea break, as you may hear, for instance, when we are producing, let me say, a radio product and say, let's take a commercial break. But we said, how do we make it sound real? So the team went out there and recorded a sound effect of tea actually pouring from a cup. I mean, from a kettle and pouring into a cup. So we have several teacups lined up, and then the tea is pouring, and that was used for the tea break. So every time during the podcast, as we are mixing and say, let's have a tea break, you actually hear the sound of tea flowing. And during the listening at the listening center, the same was replicated, that during the tea break, when the podcast is intending, we have time for tea, the tea is actually being poured. So that was kind of a good kind of creative that came in and helped with enriching the podcast itself. And then the final question was facilitated discussions needed after episodes to maximize the impact. So this was a key question, because we're asking, do we just send out stuff? And you've recorded a question on, a podcast on understanding gender, or the benefits of chat in that community, or the effects of chat in that community, and just send out the message and say it's not right. We wanted to kind of create a situation where one podcast generates a discussion, generates conversation, sparks areas of conversation where the conversation continues, people go back to their community and talk about what they have listened. So these questions were important in trying to help us come up with the final product that we came up with. Next slide, please. So the strategies used, next slide, please, UBL podcast development, the strategies we used. One, we maintained the overall structure of interventions with aligning it with the in-person UBL. So 16 sessions and learning objectives for each were outlined. And each activity was converted within a session that comprised dramas, key expert interviews. And you may ask, how were we able to get experts on the ground? So again, the team that we had, having participated in the in-person UPL productions, they understood the content, they understood the whole aspect of intimate partner violence. So what they did is, within the team of 8, we identified someone who could articulate sexuality or understanding gender. So that one, we would identify that particular team member as an expert. So it comes in following the script that was generated. They're able to articulate the key messages that we had outlined. So that was one. And then we had the in-street viewpoints. This was the Vox Pop. Thankfully, the community having been involved within the production. So it was not just the team of 8. We went out there just to gauge perception. So with the Vox Pop question, the refugee podcasters were going out there and recording the community members about a question. For instance, would you allow your wife, let me say, to, is it okay for a man to do house chores in this community? And then you had both men and women kind of taking part in the giving the answers within the Vox Pop, and then we're able to use the Vox Pops within the production. Then each episode included a mix of drama, expert interviews, then the Vox Pops, and then depending on what the team felt was more impactful and useful for that particular episode. And then towards the end of each episode, let me say 5 minutes to the end, we always had the key takeaway messages. So it's kind of a summary of what the particular episode is talking about. So if it's about gender, so we get one or two key takeaway message, which are read actually by the presenter who comes in and say, and now as we wind up this podcast series, let's look at the key takeaway message from this episode. So the key takeaway messages are outlined, and then Abdi and Fauzia, our fictional couple, comes in and kind of trying to align what they have understood from that particular message, and again, going and practicing what they have had. So they go home with homework, a kind of homework to continue with the discussion on that particular episode. So again, when it came to gauging how the community was kind of responding to our production or the podcasts, one of the things that we did, one of the key activities there was identifying a focus group. And these were members from the community, men and women, who came together, and then we played 3 podcasts for them to listen. This was a key activity because then we were able to gauge how they were responding, what they thought about the messages that were being relayed within a particular episode. And their feedback was very instrumental in helping us to refine the final podcast, that we came up with. So again, one of the key activities in this particular, by involving the community, we're able to get the community itself. The UBL podcast had a jingle at the beginning and at the end, and it's the community women who came together. We mobilized them and they come in, and that was after accepting that what the discussion around intimate partner violence affected them. They too can contribute to this production, and they came and helped in the production of the jingle. We didn't use any technical instruments like guitars or pianos. It was just teams, empty tin, and the clapping of hands, and that marks the beginning and the end of each of the episodes. Yeah. Next slide, please. So as Vandana has explained, we had in total a total of 16 episodes, and for the Unite for a Better Life podcasts, and these range from the I could say right from the part 1, episode 1 was all about the programming introduction and understanding gender in line with the Unite for a Better Life, and then 2, act like a man, act like a woman, healthy sexuality. Again, up to, we talked about, these were real kind of themes that align with the intimate partner violence. For instance, when we talked about healthy and unhealthy relationships, in this episode, we were able to define what are healthy, what would you impact a particular family or a couple, as we are looking at Fauzia and Abdi, them talking and explaining what they think is unhealthy or healthy. And obviously, in this particular episode, there was a kind of juxtaposition. So Fauzia and Abdi understand a healthy relationship in a different way to their neighbors, what their neighbors think is a healthy relationship. So they come in and they describe what is a healthy relationship, and then Fauzia and Abdi are actually going to the neighbors and saying, no, what you're doing is not right. That is not a healthy relationship. So these were themes that are resonating with what is happening in the community. And the team members, as they were producing this podcast, agreed that these are real themes that align or relate to the causes of intimate partner violence, and the solutions that are being given with the tagline, Unite for a Better Life, were critical, kind of helping. It was the thread that was tying all these themes together to give out the key messages that the community needed to prevent or understand intimate partner violence and understand the better ways of preventing it. So in total, we had 16 episodes, and you may realize from this slide that there was something called the chat use and its consequences. This was one of the kind of, it's a good episode in a way, because the community, when it came to the focus group discussion, were able to identify and say, well, this is what we see every day. And for the men, they think this one gives them energy. It gives them authority kind of over the men. So it's okay to use charts. But then when it came to kind of highlighting the consequences, then the community was able to understand, well, it's acceptable that men can take charts, but then if it's taken in regulated ways, then it helps. It can be helpful to the community and the family households, or the woman if it's a couple. So the themes or the episodes tackled different themes, but then the themes had kind of a connection. So from episode 1 up to the last, there was that connection in a way that the couple always came back to talk about what they learned about the previous episode, and what then they come back and share in the new episode. Let me say, if it was episode 10 was about violence, so episode 11 begins with introduction, yes, but then the couple shares what they learned about the previous episode on violence, and then we begin with the setting personal boundaries in relationships and sexual consent. Well, those were the episodes. Next slide, please. So I may summarize this. I could say each episode followed a consistent structure, beginning with the same jingle, which was produced by the women, a summary of what the episode was all about, an overview of the topic or theme, flashback on key messages from the previous episode, a drama skit to reinforce the messages, and a deep dive into the discussion with either a guest or expert, and then we always ended with a call to action and take-home messages. The structure, again, I will say, was designed to create consistent expectations and a fast perception of the messages. So when people are listening, when it comes to listening, it's kind of, they've already known how these podcasts are flowing, what they can expect. If someone was more interested in the drama, they will wait for the drama. They won't want to miss the drama acted by Abdi and Fauzia, or what is happening in Abdi and Fauzia's household this time around. So the drama was one way of retaining that kind of interest, and also kind of generating much more retention, getting people to like the podcast and then stay on until the last episode. Yeah. So I could quickly, next slide, yeah, envisage the UBL podcast delivery at listening centers. There was 2 groups. I could say there was the individual listening and the group listening. With the individual listening, the podcast was actually loaded onto the mobile phone, and then the people coming in to listen, women and men, were given headsets. And again, these were people who are looking at this equipment for the first time, but then there was a facilitator at the center to help them kind of, you listen, and then after listening, they go away. But with the group discussions, the group listening, groups were brought together, and then equipment, there were the speakers, and then the episode was loaded and played to the group. So there was kind of exchange at the end of the listening, them sharing what exactly was, what they've had, what they think about it, and sharing their key takeaway messages. One important aspect of this was also the fact that all this equipment was being introduced. They were looking at these technologies for the first time. And again, we use basic technology, as I've said, no studio, but just a basic recorder to record and then editing software. But again, also the interest, the passion from the team of journalists, of refugees coming together and saying, we can do this, despite the fact that they didn't have any background in journalism. And finally, I could say the impact on podcasters. Well, every successful podcast is a story of adaptation, revision, and transformation. And we really saw this in real life during the production of the UBL podcasts. The United for a Better Life podcasts were adapted to have meaningful impact on the refugee community, relaying vital information to help the community make informed decisions about intimate partner violence prevention. And we saw a huge transformation in the podcasters, from mastering the art of storytelling using engaging formats to recording the podcasts, interviewing, doing the vox pops, and editing. As one of the podcasters said, as you can see from this slide, there was a great transformation for me. In the beginning, I didn't even know about podcasts. Now I can go with my microphone, I can record the voices, I can edit, I can produce the very fantastic audio. And now, as he said, I'm a great podcaster. So that was a success story, I could say, in addition to the fact that the podcasts were appreciated by the community took active involvement. And for me, that was a key kind of lesson, that when you involve the community in any production, they feel it's part of them. And therefore, the messages you are relaying are part of them. They believe it's designed for them, and they are part of the team that designed. So they appreciate it, they're able to relate to it much more in a better way compared to just recording stuff and then taking it out there. They don't even hear voices or issues that relate to them. So that was our experience in relation to the UBL podcast development. I can now hand over to Vandana.
Great, thank you so much, Machrine. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit now about the pilot testing. Great. So after creation of the episodes, we conducted a small pilot study with about 200 households, which included some baseline and endline data collection. So we had 2 listening centers going and invited members from the 200 households to attend the listening centers to access the episodes. What we saw was that we had really high attendance rates. About 90% of the invited community members reported listening to all 16 of the episodes. And we also looked at different indicators around acceptability, relevance, utility of the program, et cetera, which were all positive. About 85% said that they had changed their behavior as a result of the episodes. In particular, women reported strengthening communication with their partner, trying out, using some of the effective listening skills that they learned about at home, dividing household tasks in a more equitable way, and trying to solve conflict in a more healthy way. Men also noted similar areas of behavior change and also reported reducing chat use and more frequently discussing sex with their partners. On average, women reported sharing information that they learned with about 12 people each, while men, on average, it was about 16 people each that they shared with. Next slide, please. So this is just some of the reported behavior changes that men and women reported. So I mentioned some of those already. The white bar is men and the blue bar is women. And you can see that, quite a lot of men and women reported sort of changing the way they communicate with the partner and using, effective listening skills and so on. Next slide, please. I just wanted to touch on the individual versus group listening that Machrine was talking about. We were interested to kind of explore this a little more with the pilot study, especially when our model for scale up would potentially involve people downloading the episodes and listening on their own. We sort of wanted to kind of compare a little bit what that would look like in terms of, people's acceptance or satisfaction with the program and potential behavior change and so on if they listened individually versus in a group. And what we did see was that among women, there wasn't really a difference in the number of episodes completed, information remembered or shared, but more women reported relevance of the program, satisfaction with the program, and behavior change when they actually listened in groups. And there was a strong preference for listening at a listening center compared to, potentially listening at home with their own device. And among men, there were no major differences between individual versus group, but there was still the strong preference for being able to come in and listen at the listening center. Next slide, please. I won't spend too long on this. We've talked about some of the challenges already. And, there were a lot of good practices that came out, and Macrine's touched on a few of these. I think these may come up as well. I saw in some of the questions that people are posting, there are some questions related to this. So I think we can, during the Q&A, delve a little bit deeper into some of these issues. Next slide, please. Our plans for the future, what we'd like to do is to be able to conduct a larger evaluation of the podcast intervention and even potentially compare it to the in-person intervention. We would like to develop some more tools to facilitate implementation and think about scaling up to some other sites. We're currently, some of our team members work in Myanmar as well, and we've been kind of exploring adapting the program to that context. Next slide, please. And we do have a number of resources. These are more related to the in-person curricula, and they're available in different languages. So English, Amharic, and Somali versions of the curricula. We have a toolkit for implementing the in-person program, both a visual media toolkit and a facilitator training toolkit. Next slide, please. And then just to end, I highlighted this in the last webinar, but I wanted to mention it to this group as well. We have a new project that we've launched together with the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, which focuses on developing guidance and tools for adapting IPV prevention programs. And we'll be compiling lessons and learnings from UBL as well as Maisha, which is another IPV prevention program in Tanzania. And we'd like to look at some other IPV prevention program adaptations as well. We're planning to develop a guidance note, a series of case studies, and some other outputs. And so we're asking for your help. So if any of you have any documents, examples, lessons, etc., related to adaptations, please feel free to reach out to me and share those by email. As well, if you're interested to participate in a key informant interview, etc., feel free as well to email me. So next slide, please. I'll stop there so that we have some time for questions and answers. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to discussing.
Great. Thank you so much, Vandana and Machrine, for such a rich presentation. We kind of running out of time, but I just wanted to acknowledge how I like the presentation, how you've summarized all the other webinars for folks who have missed it, and how important your adaptation looked at the co-creation part and how you involved the community. And it was impressive how they were so involved and you made it in these difficult conditions of a refugee context. So really great to hear from you. I will just keep the part of me summarizing any key points because my colleagues have been collecting good questions from participants, and I would like us to go to some questions of clarification before we even go into the deeper discussion. So if you can allow me to combine Annette's question. Annette was asking if the tea break you mentioned, it was included in the 45 minutes of the session. And she wanted also to know who facilitated the discussion at the listening centers. And let me give another one from Tara. Tara wanted to know which language group you're thinking of working with in Myanmar. So if you can clarify those, and then we'll go into the discussion later.
Thanks so much. Great. Yes, so absolutely. The tea break is included within each episode at a key section. It may not be exactly halfway through, but it includes, as Machrine was describing, you hear the tea being poured, and then there's some music playing. Prior to the start of the tea break, there's, the host sort of indicates that the tea break will be starting and to kind of reflect on some of the discussion that had happened sort of, in the first sections of the episode. And we did provide tea in the listening centers as well. So I'm not sure, you may have noticed in some of the pictures, you can see men and women with their cups of tea as they're listening. And then for Myanmar, I think right now, we have some other messages we've been working on that aren't in the podcast format yet, but we've been working in Myanmar language, and then as well one of the languages for Kachin State. But I think it'll depend on where we decide to focus on for the adapted version for that context of this program. But recognize there are lots of languages, and it's definitely an important consideration.
Thank you so much. And please, if for any reason you haven't got a chance to put your question in the chat box, raise your hand and then we'll give you a chance to voice your question. I'll now go to the questions for a discussion. Machrine and Vandana, Kathy wanted to know if you could talk more about the decision to use a listening center as opposed to going on radio broadly for broadcasts. Sure.
Well, in this area, there isn't really access to radio. It's a very remote location. So people in the camps, at least when we started the project, the access to even phone networks was pretty much non-existent. Same with radio, internet, etc. So broadcasting it on like a radio station just wasn't an option. We also had a preference for setting it up in a listening center based on feedback from our community advisory board and our team members. We were sort of, concerned about privacy, confidentiality, and potential unintended consequences as well. So wanted to have a safe space where people could come in, listen to the episodes, have some support if they weren't familiar with, for example, how to use a phone or a headphone. That was something that did come up, especially with women. Many women told us this is the first time they've ever used headphones. And so it was good to have the facilitators there who could help get them set up and show them how to use the devices.
Great. Thank you so much, Vandana. And I guess you've touched on the question that Ruti put in the chat box. She wanted to know why people preferred the listening center. So I think you touched on it, and if you get time, maybe you will extend a little bit on it. There's a question from Annette. She wanted to know if you were able to track if people attended the listening centers consistently, and how was mobilization of participants done?
Absolutely, yes. Because we did the implementation as part of the pilot study, we had actually sampled the 200 households who would be invited to come and participate. And so we had attendance sheets, and our facilitators in the listening centers invited specific people on specific days to come. And so we were able to kind of track participation through those attendance sheets. And most people, as I mentioned, did actually complete all 16 episodes. Some people came back multiple times to listen to the same episode because they wanted to listen to, they found it really interesting and wanted to re-listen to certain content. And so we definitely had great interest and high completion rates. In terms of community mobilization, we relied a lot on our team and our community advisory board, which included, members of the religious groups and clan leaders and other people in the camp who are, who hold a high position in the community. And they were able to help mobilize people and encourage them to participate as well. So those were some of the strategies we used.
Okay. Thank you so much. There's a question that I also had in my mind, and Lindsay put it in there. What were the challenges of the delivery? I mean, what challenges did you get as you delivered the program, and what were the pros and cons of listening centers as opposed to other delivery methods? I guess maybe here you can extend a little bit on the choice of the listening centers, but with a focus on the challenges that you encountered. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Well, with the listening centers, I mean, I think we were quite limited in terms of available spaces in the camp. There were really only like 2 or 3 potential places that would have been able to fit the needs. You know, a large enough space where people can like safely gather, where we can set up, you know, either individual stations where people could listen, or be able to, you know, have group, you know, big enough for a group to sit, for example, in a circle and have a facilitated discussion after. So we were limited by that. The other big limitation was sort of lack of electricity. So the 2 listening centers we ended up using were sort of like, I guess, halls or training rooms that were sort of owned by other organizations and who lent those to us. They both had generators, which we needed at times to, you know, power the speakers. We set it up so that one listening center was the kind of individual listening center, and the other one was group-based. And so for the group-based one in particular, we needed the power to run, you know, the speaker to broadcast the episodes. In the individual listening center, we didn't really need power because we were individuals were listening on mobile phones that we had set up at each station. But there were times during a session in the group center where, for example, you know, the generator and the solar backup didn't work anymore, and so we had trouble broadcasting. So those sorts of things did happen. Beyond that, I mean, I think things went pretty smoothly, more smoothly than I had anticipated. We didn't really see, for example, unintended consequences or, you know, other sort of, you know, negative aspects that we were worried about. And we were able to kind of, you know, keep the participation rates high, which was also another concern.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Just to give you time to breathe a bit, just mentioning a comment from Lubna. She's saying that one great example of podcasting making an impact in Nepal is the country's first podcast series on menstruation. It covers diverse topics and a range of speakers in a storytelling format. Thanks, Robna, for sharing. Maybe we'll get an opportunity to hear more about that from Nepal context. Going back to our questions, I'm combining a question from Kathy Duran and another from Tara. Kathy wants to know when would you choose a podcast delivery versus in person and why? If you can combine that with, do you think it was essential that you had to run the in-person version first and had that foundation to build on, or do you think it would be possible to start with the podcast modality? So.
Great, those are great questions. Thanks, Kathy. I would say that our thinking when we designed the program was sort of around harder to reach populations where we wouldn't be able to conduct intensive in-person programming over multiple numbers of weeks. So we were thinking about, you know, acute humanitarian crises, and kind of how do we get sort of some of this IPV prevention messaging and information out to some of those populations. And that's sort of what kind of that's how we ended up with this sort of idea for the podcast. So I think that's some of our thinking still, though we are sort of wondering, or some of the questions we have is whether, for example, having a blended approach where, you know, people participate in the in-person session and then have the podcast to kind of listen to on their own and reinforce content might actually be an interesting thing to think about as well. Now, in the context of COVID, I think the podcast episodes are relevant as well when we have sort of, you know, restrictions in place about social gatherings and things like that. And so we had gotten requests in the camp to expand the program during the context of COVID because there were reported increases in IPV happening and, you know, no possibility really to have in-person group-based sessions. So I think there are a lot of situations where I think the podcast episode is more and more relevant. In terms of whether it's necessary to have sort of the in-person program first, I wouldn't say it's necessary, but it certainly, I think was really useful to have done all of that work first and be able to build on that for this project. And as you've heard, we built on the in-person program in multiple ways, not only sort of in the structure and content of the episodes, but even by drawing on our pool of facilitators to kind of contribute to the podcasting. I will say that in the Myanmar context, where we're hoping to be able to adapt the podcast program, we have not adapted the in-person program yet. So that would be one setting where we're starting with the podcast approach. Great. Thank you so much. And please, those who asked questions, if you need further clarification, you can still put your follow-up question in the chat box and we'll bring back to the panelists to address. Someone wanted, Lindsay wanted to know if there were some barriers to women being able to attend the listening centers. Great. I do think there were some barriers, and I mean, it's the same barriers that were faced when we had the in-person UBL program previously. So things like, you know, having to take care of children or, you know, needing to work, other things like that. But in terms of addressing those, we tried to give, I know there's a question about if we had specific time slots for the episodes, and actually what we ended up doing was giving people an entire day to come in to listen to an episode, so they could come in anytime during that day to be able to listen, to give it a little bit more flexibility to address some of those, you know, challenges that women might have about when they can come. I will say, though, that the participation and completion rates were really high among women. So I don't think the barriers actually translated into sort of reduced access per se. We didn't see that in the data. Okay, that's really good to know. Were some listening sessions scheduled at specific times, or it was just drop in? And if we could combine that question from Lindsay again with one from Annette, she also wanted to know if you had specific episodes for individuals or for group listening, or the content was the same for both. Yeah, the content was the same for both. So we used the same episodes. Either they were, you know, on mobile devices and people listened to them, or they were broadcast via speaker in the group sessions. So in terms of the drop-in versus the time slots, for the group sessions, because the goal was to have the same group members attend together each of the episodes, they were given specific times to meet on specific days. Okay. For the individual listening, it was more like a drop-in approach. So, you know, there were certain days when we were broadcasting or had available like episode 1 in the individual center, and then people were sort of assigned a day and they could come in anytime during that day. If they missed an episode, we were pretty flexible and we let them listen to the episode when they were able to come in, say, the next day. Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm going to the participants. I can see Laurie's hand is up. Laurie, if you could voice your question, please.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the script development process, in the sense of, balancing, trying to communicate certain messages that were core to your content, right, from your original, and sort of have the community very involved in developing and setting the boundaries around how, what feels comfortable to talk about and the like. So just sort of some of the challenges you may have faced in finding that balance. And then the second thing is were things actually written out and then people read them sort of from a script, or were they just given sort of key ideas and they sort of improvised? I'm just wondering about the actual, how do you help it sound realistic and not so stilted, and if you could say a little bit about that process.
Excellent, thanks, Lori. Maybe Machrine, would you like to start and share your thoughts, and then I can come in after and say a little more.
Sure, thank you, Lori. Well, with the script development, like I said earlier, we sat together as a team, the UBL team, and then looked at the in-person UBL curricula, or the entire 16 kind of thematic areas that were tackled there. And then we had to think about, because with the podcast, then you're looking outside in terms of the length. So there are various things that we considered. One was, what messages are we picking out? And how can we make sure that we are not kind of watering down what was initially in the in-person UBL program, once we kind of shift or carry over some of the key messages into the podcast format. So we thought about the messages, what are the critical messages that must be reflected in the podcast version. Two, we also thought about, you have talked rightly about what could be some areas that could kind of cause discomfort in the community where these podcasts are going to be shared. So we looked at those areas, but what we did mainly in developing the script, we worked together as a team, agreed on the key messages. And once we had identified the messages in line with the theme, the thematic, or what in the podcast version became the episodes in the UBL in-person program, it's mainly like thematic areas. So we agreed on key messages extracted from each of the episodes for each of the episodes. And then we went, once we arrived in Bokolmayo, it was important that these scripts, the scripts we had generated. So let me say episode 1, understanding, and if I could go back to, or let me give an example of understanding sexuality. So once we had that, we went back, once we had the team that had been recruited, because these refugees came from the community itself, they had to go back. We shared with them the scripts that we had generated for them to look at the content therein and agree whether some lines, because I can give an example during the focus group discussion. And one of the episodes that did bring about a kind of a discomfort, a level of discomfort, was the discussion on sexuality, where they said that whereas it's okay, for instance, for a woman to say, let me say in my culture, that the woman would say, well, I feel like you're neglecting me, or you are no longer caring about me. In that context, once we were in Bokolmayo, they were able to say, no. For us, it is unacceptable. A woman cannot even say that. It's the man that makes the move, but not a woman coming up to complain about her sexuality and how someone is not paying attention. So that discussion, passing the scripts through that local team on the ground that understands the cultural aspect, was very useful, because then we're able to make some revisions within the script and then adapt them in line with the expectations of that community. And also, there was this back and forth. We kept, like, it was not like a once-off kind of activity where we decided, okay, we have accepted or we have agreed on the messages that are being generated for each of the episodes, and then we go. No, we did a lot of kind of back and forth within the team members, looking at the script, revising until we had the kind of the agreed length, agreed messages that we want, and the agreed formats for the script. Yeah, that's what I could say. Over to you, Vandana.
Thanks. And yeah, Lori, there was this script, as Machrine was saying, and that was sort of used. So I think, and I don't know, Machrine, if you can say anything about sort of the acting skills of our team members, because I feel like they did a really good job of not seeming like they were reading, right? Like, I think our feedback from the participants as well who listened to them, you know, they were like super engaged in this couple, Abdi and Fauzia. That couple was acted out by two of our team members throughout, but I think it was done really realistically. So they were able to, you know, refine even the dramas and kind of make them more realistic and then act them out really well. The only part that was unscripted was what Machrine calls the vox pops, which are the kind of person on the street type interviews where we're trying to ask a question of, you know, kind of random community members, like, what do you think about this? And then kind of recording 10 perspectives about, you know, whether it's okay for women to work, or, you know, just different topics, and then kind of gauging, you know, community perceptions that way. So those were unscripted, but the rest was fully scripted.
And just one quick follow-up then. So as it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, so it sounds like you sort of, your original team that's been working on this developed a script based on things that you thought were important to maintain, that then was sort of tested through a local group of people who responded and gave feedback and guidance and things in terms of what was appropriate locally, and that went back and forth. The folks who you were saying, when you talk about your team who, for example, acted out the two local people, were they staff of yours, or were they from the camps? Or I'm just interested in sort of what level of sophistication someone, not, you know, you would need to pull off something like this.
Sure. Yeah, sort of what you described is pretty accurate. I mean, Machrine played a big role in, given her expertise in communications and so on, in kind of developing the initial drafts of the script, but it included sort of input from our original UBL team. And then that was, you know, further worked on with our team of podcasters who are the local refugees, the 8 members of the camp that we recruited. And they're the ones who acted out, you know, the couple and different elements. So they were refugees from the camp, you know, who'd never done anything like this before. So it was a learning experience for everyone. And I would say, I wouldn't really call much of this sophisticated, in the sense that, you know, we were using really low tech equipment, low tech setting. Our team was, you know, had never done anything like this before. It was all new for everyone.
Great, really exciting. Thank you.
I think I would add that something I would like to add.
Thank you all. Thanks, Laurie and Machrine.
Oh, Machrine, did you want to add something?
Go ahead, Machrine.
Something that in relation to the production, because I mean, when the final production itself is good quality content, and even the fact that all these were ready to read or ready to act scripts, that we dedicated 1 week to training this team of refugees who had never had any prior knowledge about journalism. So the 1 week because it was, we dedicated almost 8 hours per day for the first 5 days to make sure we are training them in interviewing skills, discussion. If it's a discussion, we got them just to act out, like role plays. So we are staging role plays, and they're acting out the discussion. And then you have to have what we call, even during the acting out the role plays, we are recording, and then they listen to themselves again. And when they listen, they're able to understand, to kind of figure out, did they do it so well, or is there something that they need to do? So they give themselves feedback. We get into circles, put them in circles, and say, now we are listening to a discussion between these two, because there will be a discussion within the main script. So what do you think? They give themselves feedback. I think the training, the initial 1 week training prior to the recording, that stage of recording, played a key role. Because even with the dramas, they were able to act out the skits. In recording, obviously, if you're aware about that, it's what we call take 1, take 2, take 3. So take 1, they listen, what can be improved. They do a take 2 until we have a final take. So we played around with several takes before we narrowed down now to the final one. So for me, training was critical, also was a key element that played a key role in the success of the podcast production.
Thank you so much, Machrine, for clarifying. Just being cautious of time, we still have a few questions. So can you talk to how did the project ensure ethical consideration were made? And what was the incentives or motivation for facilitation as well as participants?
Great, thanks so much. I mean, we followed sort of all the usual ethical procedures. We had IRB approval for the project. We had our community advisory board that guided all aspects of the project, both in terms of the intervention, but also the research component. And so, things we talked about in previous webinars around sort of ensuring, confidentiality, privacy, all those sorts of things were important. And then we tracked unintended consequences as well. And then, apologies, what was the second part of the question?
They wanted to know if there was incentives or motivation for facilitators as well as participants.
Okay. Well, our facilitators and the podcasters were staff members of the project. So they were receiving compensation as part of that. And for the listeners, there was no compensation besides the tea that they got at the listening center. And the refreshments basically was all that was provided.
Great. Thanks so much. And Isabel and I guess some other people here would like to know if you're planning to do another survey later in time to see if there is change in behavior and attitudes or in long term.
That's a great question. We don't have anything planned right now, but we were hoping to be able to do just a larger impact evaluation on the program. So, I think things have stalled a little bit with COVID, and I'm sure everybody's experiencing that, but it is still a goal that we have to be able to do in the future.
Great. Looking forward to that if you do. Can you, Tara would like to know how long it took to create the 16 episodes. I'm sorry if I missed it. And so did Tara, from start to completion and ready to broadcast.
Sure. In terms of the actual field work, when we were on the ground, Machrine, that whole process took around a month, I would say. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a month. 1 week for training, 2 weeks dedicated to recording all the content, and the last week, the fourth week, was for editing.
And then the episodes were ready to go, and we held our podcast pilot. Now, there was quite a bit of time before actually starting the process in the camp with the podcasters, where sort of there were a lot of, lots of discussion and dialogue around, how do we convert each session into an audio episode? And, there was a lot of discussion around there, and a lot of time kind of put into thinking about each individual activity within a given session and kind of what would be the best format for it. How do, should a specific activity be converted to, a debate, or should it be converted to a drama, or should it be converted to some other type of format? And then kind of trying to put together those initial first scripts. So I'm not sure how long that took, but it was months prior to actually working with the podcasters.
Great, thanks so much. And one last question. Could you talk a little bit about the take-home activities that you gave? That was from Ruti, and I'm curious to know as well.
Sure. Well, they were the same take-home activities that we have in the in-person curricula, but were sort of sometimes I think had to be modified a little bit, but it was things like if the session focused on a healthy or effective listening skills, and there was 7 key strategies, and in the episode you might have had Abdi and Fauzia kind of try them out and report back how it went. there might have been some other content around that. And then the take-home message would be, okay, take these 7 strategies and try these at home. So that's one example of the type of activities that we would suggest to go home with.
Thank you so much. Any other question from the audience? Anyone with a question that they would like to ask before we end the session? I'll take this as a no. Great, thanks. So I would like to take the time to thank you so much, Vandana and Machrine, for this great session. And I would like also to thank Samuel in absentia, because I know for the 2 first webinars, he was there to present. And this has been such a rich process, the 3 webinars. It's been a very rich journey, and I could see in the chat box people who are interested in the adaptation of this program. And really, we can't thank you enough. And it's been such a great collaboration. And on behalf of the Prevention Collaborative, I'd like to thank all the participants. Thanks for being here today. And for those who attended the other webinars, I hope this has been a rich experience for you. It has been for me in any case. So if you want to stay connected with us, Juliana is putting up the stay connected links, and would be interested in getting any other question before we share the final. We're going to circulate not the presentation, but the recording, and feel free if you want to have a full picture of the Unite for a Better Life program. There will be three on our website. So thank you so much. Unless there is, yeah, there's a good comment from Jessica, really compelling work. Yeah, I agree, I can't agree more. So thank you so much, Vandana. Thanks, Birungi, for your time. And this was a rich presentation. We look forward to staying connected. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.